Welcome back once again to Viper Bites here. We are doing our Sunday Night Football primetime preview, football and a movie. And tonight we've got ourselves not a great movie, but you know what's a lot of big names in it. It talks a little bit about where we're going to go with the Steelers team in general. And Ben Roethlisberger, more so than any, has a little bit of a Pittsburgh tie-in, et cetera, et cetera. Now, before we get into the whole meat and potatoes of today's show, you know we're going to go player by player, preview the position, preview each player that has some kind of fantasy relevancy going into this matchup. But before we do that, make sure to take a chance, hit that subscribe button on the Vipers Network here. Make sure you like this video. That'd be great. And if you're catching this on the Apple Podcast or Spotify, make sure when you download each episode that you also go ahead and rate and review us. Preferably the more stars, the better. But you know what? You say, make those comments. I read each and every comment that comes across, and I appreciate your feedback as we go through that. So again, smash that like, hit that subscribe. And with that being said, we're going to get on to this Sunday Night Football matchup between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Seattle Seahawks. Now, a couple weeks ago, maybe beginning of the season, this matchup looked a lot better on paper than it's turned out to be so far. Since then, for the Seahawks, you know, Russell Wilson, he was put on IR. He's out till at least week 10. And then if you go to a little bit of coaches speak here, on Friday, Pete Carroll kind of mentioned that Chris Carson is a possible candidate as well for the IR. He's still dealing with that neck injury. He missed last week because of it. He's missing this week. He's already been ruled out. So that's something to keep an eye on. DK Metcalf did not participate on Thursday. However, we're not worried about him playing. We think he's going to be a full go come Sunday night. And Bobby Wagner, he was limited again with that knee injury. He's questionable. Now, on the Steelers side, we got Juju Smith-Schuster. He is out. He's on the IR. He's got that shoulder issue. We saw him last week. And another guy to keep an eye on is James Washington. He was limited. He's questionable going into this game with that groin injury. If you don't recall, first Juju Smith-Schuster went down, and then James Washington went down, and the Steelers are kind of moving bits and pieces around there. Claypool moved into the slot a little bit more than what he's accustomed to. And he's also dealing with a hamstring issue himself. That is Chase Claypool. So he's questionable. We're expecting him to be a full go. Now, the movie I chose for this one is you're probably going to have to go into Stars or maybe Netflix or whatever your provider might be to kind of dig up this one. Because this one is one of those ones that you're probably not actively going to seek to watch. And even if it's on TV, it might catch your attention with all the big names that are on it. But, you know, just like this game, even though Russell Wilson and Chris Carson and Juju Smith-Schuster are out, it still has enough big names to get excited about. You've still got Ben Roethlisberger. You've still got Najee Harris, Claypool, Diontae Johnson, DK Metcalf. You've still got Tyler Lockett. Still plenty of firepower here. Now, I'm comparing it to another film that had that star power, that had all those big names. But unfortunately, you know how it goes in Hollywood. When you have all these big names and they get together for a movie, often there is disappointment. So I went for a movie that had those big names. Sylvester Stallone, Robert De Niro, Kevin Hart, Kim Basinger, Alan Arkin, John Bernthal, Anthony Anderson, LL Cool J even made a cameo along with Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. The movie for tonight, Grudge Match, 2013. Now, I chose this because not only does it have the big names, has that kind of fighter's appeal, but also kind of talks about over-the-hill fighters in both Sylvester Stallone, as he basically became razor sharp. You had the kid, McDunn in there. Robert De Niro played that role. Both of them past their prime, much like these two teams here right now that we're looking at, more so referring to Ben Roethlisberger, because that is going to be the common theme of today's show. Now, I really want it, and it also has that Pittsburgh tie-in. I was looking for that movie that had that Pittsburgh tie-in to kind of go with everything, and Flashdance could have worked too, except some people consider Flashdance a bit of a classic, and, you know, we still see it getting aired from time to time. Unfortunately, like this game, I think after tonight, I don't think we're going to remember that this game took place, much like the movie Grudge Match back in 2013. Now, when we talk about grudge matches, you have to have met at some point. Now, I know I'm referring to Ben Roethlisberger, and I'll refer to it over and over as him being the guy over the hill. Probably should hang it up. Probably should have known when to retire. But let's not forget, these two franchises met back in Super Bowl 40. I believe that was like February 8th, give or take, 2006. In that game, Hines Ward was the MVP. And in that match, you had Ben Roethlisberger versus Matt Hasselbeck, Sean Alexander versus the dynamic duo of Willie Parker and Jerome Bettis. You had Joe Jaravicious, Bobby Ingram. They had Hines Ward, Antoine Randall. And in that game, the Steelers won 21-10, much like Razor Sharp took down the kid in Grudge Match. Now, basically in the film, it's Ben Roethlisberger's life story. And I'm going to use the Wikipedia page itself here to kind of give you the synopsis of the film. In their prime, Pittsburgh boxers Henry Razor Sharp, played by Sylvester Stallone, and Billy the Kid McDonough, played by Robert De Niro, became rivals after 2 fights in which the Kid beats Razor in the first one, Razor beats the Kid in the second one, and those are the only defeats of their career. So now we've got to have this big matchup, the third and deciding one. Before they could have that rematch, though, Razor announces his retirement without any explanation, infuriating the Kid and costing him that one last big payday. We all know Ben Roethlisberger was great once, but everything we've seen from him the last few seasons screams, please retire. It's over. The best of you has already come and gone. Now, and I guess when we look at Geno Smith, he's no spring chicken either. He's 31. He's actually younger than Russell Wilson, but we all know that each year you play for the Jets adds 7 years to your life. So basically, Geno Smith is 59 years old right now. So let's get into the matchup itself here. We'll go talk about the film and how it ties in a little bit more as we go through this. Right now, according to Fantasy Points, in which I get all my projections, so when I make a reference to this player is projected as the QB so-and-so, it's going off of the Fantasy Points projections right now going into this Week 6 matchup. Now, Geno Smith is that QB 22 right now. That's what the expectation is. He really had the best job in all of football. He was getting paid to be Russell Wilson's backup, which basically meant getting paid to watch Russell Wilson. I don't know the exact number, but I think it was 149 games or something Russell Wilson's kind of played in that period of time, which Geno Smith's been like a portion of that, just chilling out on the bench, carrying that clipboard, doing what he does best. Now, after Wilson went down last week, Geno Smith had to step up against the Rams. He went 10 of 17 for 131 yards, ran for another 23 yards on the ground, and he threw for a touchdown, but he also had that one interception. Now, when Smith broke into the league with the Jets, he was kind of forced to scramble. In those 29 games, he was putting about 20 yards per game on the ground. Now, we didn't really see much of that in West Virginia, but in his senior season, we saw him run 56 times for 151 yards. If there's a week to earn another big payday for Geno Smith, this is a good week to start. The Steelers have allowed at least 18 fantasy points to each quarterback that they face this year. That's Josh Allen, that's Derek Carr, that's Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, and of course, Teddy Bridgewater. So here is the first opportunity for Geno Smith to earn that big payday one more time going forward, if he can be serviceable for the rest of the season, at least till week 10, when we're expecting to see Russell Wilson get back into it. Now, DK Metcalf projected to be the wide receiver 22. Welcome to trying to predict which Seahawks wide receiver is going to be the big dog each and every week. Honestly, we really don't know how it's going to play out. And you know what? There is no door number 3. You could choose door number 1, door number 2. You got a 50-50 chance here when it comes down to it. Now, both Metcalf and Lockett have 35 or more targets, and both have 25 receptions. Metcalf has 383 yards receiving, which is about 15.3 yards per catch, while Lockett has 390 yards with a 15.6 average. Really, the only difference is the 5 receiving touchdowns that DK Metcalf has, as opposed to Tyler Lockett's 3. Now, Metcalf has 5 or more targets in each game this season, but only has 2 games in which he has more than 90 yards, while the other 3 games are 65 or less. Last week against the Rams, he caught all 5 of his targets for 98 yards. There's that chemistry there a little bit with Geno Smith there, so look for that to kind of continue a little bit. He had 2 touchdowns. Lockett and Metcalf ranked 16th and 17th, respectively, in receiving yards through 5 games. But here's the kicker. That was with Russell Wilson. Now, we saw them each get their target share with Geno Smith, but here we go. Tyler Lockett, as mentioned, the numbers for Lockett are very similar to those of Metcalf, even down to the consistently being inconsistent part. The way I see it, based on the numbers last week, this game should be a Lockett game. And really, why not? Cortland Sutton and Teddy Two Gloves hooked up 7 times for 120 yards and a touchdown. Heck, even Randall Cobb, going back a couple more weeks, had 5 catches for 69 and 2 touchdowns. running out of the slot. Now, we know Seattle mixes up their slot receivers. We've seen DK there. We've seen Tyler Lockett there. We've even seen Freddie Swain take a turn at slot. So how that's going to play out, we really don't know. But that's an area that the Seahawks can take advantage of in this game. Now, last week, like I said, 5 catches, 57 yards. However, it's not really a fair assessment when looking at Tyler Lockett. He had 10 targets in that game, but the fantasy points were not there with him. I do expect the Steelers to roll more coverage Metcalf's way on Sunday night, providing Lockett with an opportunity to have one of those big games. Now, statistically speaking, after coming out of the gate on fire with back-to-back 100-yard games, including that 178-yard game against Tennessee, Lockett is in a bit of a slump right now with games of 31, 24, and last week's 57 yards receiving. The issue is, can either Lockett or Metcalf continue to be top 13 wide receivers without Russell Wilson? Currently, Metcalf, he's in there at number 10. Lockett is 5 points back of Terry McLaurin there, who holds the last spot amongst the wide receiver ones there. And Lockett is chilling out at wide receiver 13. Now, we mentioned a little bit of Freddie Swain there. We know we're going to come back to Freddie Swain here a little bit. We know Wilson had chemistry with both Lockett and Metcalf. No one can deny that fact. Look at the numbers. Chemistry with a quarterback is kind of important, as Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp have kind of figured out this year after making their little dinner arrangements. That said, often the backup quarterback, he's got 3 options. Either keep firing to the big guy on the campus there, or you could totally suck when you're not being able to force the ball to anyone, or you have a guy that's on the practice squad or who doesn't get the reps with the ones who you've been building that chemistry with for a year or two. And that guy for the Seahawks is either Freddie Swain or Penny Hart. As the Seahawks only carry 4 wide receivers because Eskridge, he's out right now as well. He's on the IR. But last week, Freddie Swain had 1 catch for 9 yards. Penny Hart, we had a sighting him. He had 2 catches, 2 targets, 19 yards. I'm not saying either will be fantasy relevant this week, but keep an eye on Penny Hart here. He could be that waiver wire target that we're looking at next week. I don't know what to expect here, but like I said, until Eskridge comes back, it's going to be an open competition at the wide receiver 3 spot when it comes to working with Geno Smith. Now, I mentioned Chris Carson. He is out for that contest. That means Alex Collins gets that opportunity to be that guy again. It's still early. Things can change, but I don't see Alex Collins being able to be that guy. I think we're going to see a little DJ Dallas. I think we're going to see a little bit of Travis Homer mixed in there. They got in there in the passing game a little bit more. And when it comes down to it, I can't trust Alex Collins. Now, when we look at with Wilson and Carson both out, that's 68 yards rushing for Wilson, 232 yards rushing for Chris Carson. That adds up to about 58% of the Seahawks rushing yards not being available for this game against the Steelers. That is essentially the equivalent, here we go, going back to Grudge Match, the equivalent to Razor Sharp fighting the Kid McDonough with one eye, which is the reason why he had to call her quits there way back when, is because he couldn't see out of his eye anymore. Now, when we look at this a little bit deeper, which in Grudge Match is pretty much what happened, except McDonough wanted to make sure that Sharp had no excuses and would fight him straight up. I don't see the Steelers fighting the Seahawks straight up. If you're going to be at a disadvantage, the Steelers are going to take advantage of that every opportunity that they get. Now, Alex Collins is averaging 4 yards per carry this year, which is actually not a bad stat to have, except the volume's not there. Last week, 10 carries, 44 yards, and a touchdown against the 49ers. And then, that was the week before. And then last week, 15 carries, 47 yards against the Rams. Also note that this Steelers defense has not allowed a running back to score more than 12 fantasy points in any game this year. Now, at the tight end position for the Seahawks, Seattle was upset last week that Gerald Everett received all the clearance, all the COVID tests came back, how they needed to be for him to be eligible for the Thursday night game, except the paperwork or whatever that looks like did not get into the league office, making Gerald Everett ineligible to play. Welcome to the new NFL among COVID here. So when the season started, fantasy managers, they were getting excited about Gerald Everett, especially those who punted the tight end position the first few rounds. Well, he hasn't produced since coming into the lineup. He really hasn't. He's got about 9 targets, catching 8 of them for 77 yards. But the good news is he is playing about 77% of the snaps. So if you're Geno Smith and you're looking for a safe check down option, last week he targeted Will Dissly 3 times. I think Dissly had about 18% of the target share from Geno Smith. And let's be honest, when TJ Watt is trying to give you an aggressive hug each and every play, you may want to check it down to tight ends such as Gerald Everett. Now for the Steelers, we know Ben Roethlisberger. We could call him the kid. We could call him Razor. It doesn't matter. We can call him old because that's pretty much what he is. He's projected to be the quarterback 24. And how bad has Roethlisberger been this year? Let me save you the film study. You don't want to watch it. It hasn't been flattering. Instead, imagine having 3 potential 1,000-yard receivers on your team and one of the most dynamic running backs and still being the QB 25 through 5 weeks. QB 26, heck, Roethlisberger, he's averaging 13.6 fantasy points per game. Last week was the only time he had 16 or more fantasy points all season, and I chose 16 as the threshold because that's literally what he had. He went 15 of 25 for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns in a victory over Denver. Now, Seattle gives up the second most passing yards at 321.6 per game and the 10th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks to 21.5. So maybe Roethlisberger can get right. I don't know. I don't see it. Chase Claypool projected as the wide receiver 15. He is currently the wide receiver 34 when it comes to fantasy football wide receiver supremacy. And I feel with Juju Smith-Schuster now out for the season, Claypool is the Steelers receiver that benefits the most. Look for Claypool to step in opposite there of Johnson there on the outside. You're going to have Claypool maybe playing a little bit more of a big slot, maybe slide James Washington in there a little bit. Ray McLeod kind of going on the other boundary there, rotating back and forth. Diontae Johnson will continue to get his, yes. James Washington has some appeal, sure, but it's Claypool for me. If you're looking for wide receivers to target via trade, then Claypool is a guy you want to target before this matchup. Last week, he had 130 yards, a touchdown in that victory against the Broncos, and it's only going to get better with the volume that he's about to receive here. Now, we talk about the dynamic duo in the Pacific Northwest. Well, the Steelers duo is formidable themselves. Claypool has 341 receiving yards on the year with 20 receptions while being targeted 35 times. Diontae Johnson, on the other hand, is the wide receiver 21 and is projected to be the wide receiver 11 this week, according to fantasypoints.com. Now, when we look at that, he's got 25 receptions on 35 looks for 305 yards while only playing in 4 contests this season. In those 4 contests, he has had 10 or more targets and 70 or more yards in 3 of those 4 games. Now, week 1 versus Buffalo, he was held to 36 yards, but the Bills have limited pretty much every receiver. We could talk about that all day long. We'll talk about that on the Monday Night Football preview as well, because every time I talk Bills, I talk about how they've been shutting down wide receivers. That, again, the other time he was limited to 2 targets was last week there in that matchup last week. So against those Broncos. The Seahawks are giving up the second most receiving yards per game, 212.2. And they're also giving up the 14.3 yards per reception to wide receivers this season, which is a lot. Let's put it that way. It's a lot. Now, Najee Harris, I'm not as high as fantasy points is. They've got him projected as as the running back 1 this week. I've got him as a running back 1. He's a little bit further down on my chart. I got about, I think, RB8. Either way, you're getting good value out of him. Now, when we're looking at him as RB1, he's facing the Seahawks run defense that really leaves little to be desired. The Seahawks have given up on average of 145.2 yards per game on the ground to opposing backs. And the Seahawks should be happy about this. This game is in Pittsburgh because their run defense is actually better on the road, only giving up 132 yards per game, as opposed to when they're at home, they yield 165. A little bit of a difference here. Now, the rookie from Alabama sits 15th in the league in rushing yards with 307 yards. That's only 333 yards behind Derrick Henry, who leads the league right now. Now, okay, I get it. He also has 198 yards receiving to give him 505 yards from scrimmage. More impressive is that those 505 are 11th most from scrimmage to date and 7th most among running backs. And that includes Leonard Fournette's yardage from Thursday Night Football. Najee Harris has 19 or more fantasy points in 4 consecutive games, and there's a good chance he sees another uptick in targets as well this week. The Seahawks are giving up the second most rushing yards per game at 126.6 and 4.4 yards per game to running backs this year. And he's coming off, Najee Harris, he's coming off a 122-yard performance against the Broncos, which was the first 100-yard game since, James Conner last October. And there's a good chance Najee can repeat this. Now, we want to talk about some other little options here. We'll run through this quick. James Washington has been a low-key favorite deep target of Ben Roethlisberger for a few years now. I'm not even sure Ben Roethlisberger can throw the ball more than 40 yards, but the connection was once there. Maybe it can get rekindled again. And in the last 2 games, James Washington has seen 5 targets in each of those games. He has 89 yards, 69, which came last week in the loss to the Packers. And he's averaging 17.3 yards per catch, which with Juju Smith-Schuster out, look for Roethlisberger to spread the ball about, throw maybe a few more YOLO balls James Washington's way. Now, tight end, Pratt Freiermuth, tight end 26 is projected. The tight end position hasn't yielded much of a fantasy return this year for the Steelers, but we can certainly say that Freiermuth has been more effective than Eric Ebron. The Penn State product has 11 catches on 13 targets for 100 yards, where Ebron has 5 catches on 11 targets for 37. Ebron had 19 of those in week 1 and had 18 yards since then. And for Freiermuth, it hasn't been much better. After 20 or more receiving yards in each of the first 3 games, he's failed to even hit 15 in the last 2. Now, like Grudge Match, you will be cheering for this one to be over. Both teams will get their punches in. Both teams will eat a few as well. Both teams will get knocked down to the canvas and get back up, but no one will deliver that knockout blow. And when the bell rings, expect the Steelers to win this with a split decision, 24-17 Steelers. That said, like I said, make sure you check out the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast every Wednesday, 10 p.m. Eastern on the Vipers Network. And until then, thank you, and we'll see you later.